Take leaders' questions under Standing Order 36, and we begin with Deputy Matt Carthy. Deputy Carthy.
As we meet here, Israel's genocide in Gaza continues. Israel's attacks on the West Bank continue. And now Israel's bombardment of Lebanon continues, and Israeli leaders are openly discussing a land invasion. Israel is committing war crimes every day. That state is in flagrant violation of international law, just as they have been not for a year, but for several decades. Today we are on the brink of a global humanitarian and security catastrophe. Every time we think things cannot get any worse, Israel proves us wrong. And why is this? How could it be that a state that enjoys the most preferential trading, economic and diplomatic relationship with the Western world would be in a position to literally brag about consigning the international rule book to the dustbin of history? The answer is, of course, that the Israeli forces murder innocent Palestinian and now Lebanese people at will because they believe they can do so with impunity. That is because they have never faced a consequence for their actions. Taoiseach, the Irish people have long believed that Israel should face consequences. They recall how measures taken by Ireland helped, even in a small way, to bring an end to South African apartheid. And for years they have been demanding that we do the same in respect of Israeli apartheid in Palestine. One of the things that we can do, in fact one of the things that we should have done years ago, is enact the Occupied Territories Bill. The bill isn't controversial, or at least it shouldn't be. It simply bans trade with and economic support for illegal settlements in territories deemed occupied under international law. Your party supported this when you were in opposition. Not only supported it, you ran a roadshow in towns and cities across Ireland setting out its importance. Fine Gael, on the other hand, as we know, opposed the passage of the Occupied Territories Bill every step of the way. But despite this, the legislation was adopted by both the Dáil and the Seanad, but Fine Gael governments have blocked the enactment of it. Upon entering government, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party, it has to be said, have allowed Fine Gael to continue blocking this legislation. And we've heard the excuses as to why the bill hasn't been enacted. But reporting from the Ditch website suggests that following a confidential and unrecorded call with Minister Paschal O'Donoghue, Israeli officials were in little doubt that the bill would be blocked by the Fine Gael government. We're told that Israeli officials emphasised that this was a confidential call, and that chimes, of course, with Minister O'Donoghue's own failure to record it in his ministerial diary and your contention that the minister cannot recall the conversation. Can Corla Cahimed Jli Irdanashanta Akasant. Cahimed John Dénacht Akasant. Cahi Israel Ave Fregrach as Narudi Ayenan Sheed. While Taoiseach, your language has welcomely changed over the past year, moving on from a point where you wouldn't even condemn Israel by name to finally moving on the recognition of Palestine, the truth is that your government cannot point to a single sanction that Ireland has imposed on the Israeli state for their actions. So in that context, I have to ask you, do you agree that Minister Paschal O'Donoghue, indeed all ministers, should set out clearly the detail of any engagements they've had with their Israeli counterparts or officials? But above all, do you agree that it is now time that the Irish government take action against an Israeli state that has been in grievous breach of international law for decades and that is currently conducting a genocide against the Irish people? So will you commit today to enacting the Occupied Territories Bill, to allowing the passage of Sinn Féin's illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill, and take other measures to ensure that Ireland can clearly state that here at least there are consequences for a powerful state that embarks on a cowardly, depraved attacks against civilian populations?
Thank you, Deputy Carthy. Taoiseach.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for raising this extremely important issue. The carnage, the slaughter of innocent children, women and men across the Middle East is to be condemned, and I've condemned it consistently. The action of Hamas on October the 7th was horrific, was heinous, but the Israeli response to that murderous attack by Hamas has been absolutely disproportionate, has resulted in the levelling of Gaza, near famine conditions in Gaza, and the killing of over 40,000 people, which in my view is reprehensible. And likewise, I have condemned the escalation into Lebanon, where the intensity of that bombardment is such that, again, innocent men, women and children are being killed. At every international forum, and again this week in New York, just back from New York, I've focused particularly on the Middle East question, attending the International Peace Institute dinner on Monday evening with all of the Arab partners and other interested partners in respect of endeavouring to get the Middle East on a pathway to a two-state solution and a resolution of this. And I met yesterday with the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. He was very grateful to Ireland and very appreciative of Ireland's consistent stance in support of international humanitarian law and in support of the Palestinian right to self-determination. I met with the Jordanian Foreign Minister yesterday. Again, he reiterated, which he has done on numerous occasions, his appreciation for Ireland standing up for Palestinian self-determination and for a two-state solution. And similarly with the Egyptian Foreign Minister yesterday also. And what I would say to you, Deputy, just generally, I've noticed a tendency on your behalf to sort of create a division or almost to suggest that the government is not, the government parties are not fully committed to either the two-state solution, to Palestinian self-determination, or to calling out blatant violations of international humanitarian law. Because the view outside of Ireland is that Ireland has been one of the leading countries in actually standing up for what is right. That is the view externally. And I think it's regrettable that at times you have sought to sow the seeds of division or almost drive a wedge or almost create a political sort of advantageous sort of positioning on this issue vis-à-vis government parties. The issue is far too serious for that. In respect of the, I would make the point, and one significant development I think in the last number of months has been the conclusions of the International Court of Justice in respect of its advisory opinion on the occupation of Palestinian territories. And that is a very serious conclusion by the court. Now remember, Ireland supported the resolution that led to that advisory opinion. The Attorney General made submissions on behalf of the country in respect of that. And during yesterday's discussions with the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, the debate focused on how we can use that finding, that advisory opinion in respect of the illegality of the occupation and the fact that member states and those who've signed up to the ICJ, because this is the very apex of international humanitarian law and observations, that how do we now progress that? And we focused on the programme of, on a timeline to seeing what we can do on that. Ireland, as you know, wrote to the European Commission calling for a review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement with Spain. Josep Borrell, the high-level representative, has now sought legal advice on the ICJ opinion. In respect of Minister Paschal Donoghue, I've spoken to him before I came in this morning. He is clear that he did not make any such phone call.
Thank you.
And there is no, and his published diary doesn't record any such phone call. And I think it speaks to people rushing to judgment before ascertaining the full facts. He is very, very clear, Deputy.
Time is up,
and I think you should perhaps withdraw the assertions in your earlier public statements in that regard.
Deputy Carthy.
Well, my assertions amounted to a request that all government ministers clarify the full interactions that they have had with Israeli government ministers and state officials, and you didn't answer whether or not that would be forthcoming. You set out very clearly and rightly the realities of Israeli actions in both Palestine and Lebanon, but you didn't set out any consequences for those actions. I have no doubt that there are many within the international community that are very grateful for the positions that Ireland has taken. In fact, I'm very glad that Ireland speaks out against what is a grievous record of atrocious atrocities on the part of the Israeli state against the Israeli people. But I make no apologies for saying we must go further. There has to be consequences, because the reason Israel continues to do what it is doing is because it has faced not a single consequence for the unrelented and unmitigated murder of children, women and innocent men across many, many years. So my question was, will you As a leader of a party that ran public meetings up and down this state encouraging support for the enactment of the Occupied Territories Bill, now that you're in the position, ensure that your government do that now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, when countless more innocent people will have been killed, but now.
Thank you. Taoiseach, please.
Again, Ireland, along with Spain, were the first two more recent European Union member states to recognise the state of Palestine. Slovenia has now followed on the recognition question. Norway also, as you know, did that. We were, I think, central to turning around the narrative in relation to UNRWA at the European Union, within the European Union, and stopping the denial of aid and vital aid into UNRWA, and likewise in terms of aid and support from the Commission to the Palestinian Authority, which should have been far more frequent and shouldn't have been subjected to stop-start as it was. On the legal front, we have pursued all avenues of justice, which does challenge Israel in respect of international humanitarian law, and it's something that they do take our umbrage at, and have taken particular umbrage at Ireland's positioning before the ICJ, before the ICC, and in respect of the recognition questions and our general stance overall. The legal advice that the Attorney General, previous Attorney Generals gave in respect of the Occupied Territories Bill was that it was contrary to European Union law in respect of the conduct of trade. Now there is further advice being sought in respect of that, but also in the context of the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, which, as I say, has been sought by our government, but also at European Union level in respect. What are the obligations on EU member states in respect of the ICJ's advisory opinion? I think it's a very significant turning point, and Europe has to face up to that reality.
Thank you. Deputy Jed Nash, please.
Minister, in 5 days' time we will have the annual budget. True to form, most of the major announcements will of course be leaked over the weekend. The state is in an unprecedented situation. Billions are available to invest, yet there is a poverty of ambition and no vision. We live in a rich country that feels so poor. It's a country of winners and losers. Now, Ireland has a chronic infrastructural deficit. Despite recent increases in the capital budget, as a percentage of overall government spending, it remains below where it was in 2008. Now, 2 weeks ago, Minister Chambers said he would have €3 billion extra to spend on infrastructure from the sale of AIB shares. The Summer Economic Statement outlines an increase in capital spending of €1.7 billion under the National Development Plan, up to €14.5 billion, bolstered by what I describe as the gimmick of €750 million of so-called windfall receipts. Now, that leaves a gap of €1.3 billion. Now, is the Minister for Finance planning to formally change the capital spending allocations? Will there be a new National Development Plan, or are we going to get more fiscal gimmickry in this budget? Will you confirm today, Taoiseach, that the Government intends to increase the budget figures that were published in July in the Summer Economic Statement? Because we do need to invest more, not in gold-plated bike sheds or security huts, but in our hospitals, on public transport and retrofitting, and most critically in housing. Now, the greatest workers' rights issue remains housing, and prices rose by 10% last year. Affordability is the problem, and we need much increased supply of over 50,000 new homes a year. Now, government policies like Help to Buy have actually hiked up prices, and the ESRI confirmed this last year. It's driven demand rather than boosting supply, and it is making homes dearer. Reports today say the Minister wants the cap increased above £500,000. So is that Fianna Fáil policy to subsidise the cost of housing, costing more than £500,000? Driving development needs increased funding from the state and policy certainty. Planning law has been changed almost yearly in recent years, and crucially, the residential zoned land tax has become a political football, and we still don't know if it's going to be in place next year. So we don't have a revised housing target from this government, and no clear sense if you will invest more when the private market and developers have failed to build enough. Housing for All proposes to build 10,000 social housing units next year and 6,400 affordable and cost rental homes. That's barely any increase on this year. And you say Housing for All is the only show in town. Now, Labour will outline our budget plans tomorrow to increase that by up to 6,000 more units a year, focused on public and affordable homes. So, Taoiseach, can you guarantee that the residential zoned land tax will in fact be operational next year? Do you agree with increasing Help to Buy for homes costing more than £500,000? Is the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure going to increase capital spending above what was in the summer economic statement? And will the budget commit to increasing the number of social and affordable homes that will be built way beyond what is committed in your Housing for All policy?
Thank you, Deputy Nash. Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, I thank the Deputy for his remarks, and I would argue with him that there's no poverty of ambition. I think last year or this year we're spending up to 13+ billion on capital infrastructure, which is significantly higher than previous years, and the rate and level of capital expenditure during this government's term has been significantly higher than previous governments. The challenge with capital expenditure, of course, is the balance of making sure you don't overheat the economy in terms of the allocation of additional billions. But I think what we have done, which shows real ambition for the future, is the Future Ireland funds, the establishment of the Future Ireland Fund, the establishment of the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund, where we are essentially future-proofing infrastructure for the long haul and giving confidence and certainty to industry, to the housing sector and the other sectors, that we intend to maintain expenditure levels or increase them progressively over the next number of years, notwithstanding the potential of cyclical changes. In other words, there will be ups and downs in the economy, revenue could go down, but through the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund, we are saying we will have a fund there to make sure we get the metro done, to make sure that we get the roads that we want done built, to get more schools built, get more hospitals built, and infrastructure more generally. Now, there will be a release of additional capital from the IB shares, and it is fairly clear that that will be allocated to infrastructure and principally housing, to future-proof housing expenditure right through the decade, and water infrastructure, which I think is key, particularly for the towns and villages across the country, that we mandate Irish Water to do more with local authorities in respect of villages, towns, and the water treatment provision and plants in such towns, and of course investment in the grid, which is going to be essential in terms of the wind energy transformation that will occur in this country, but will require certainty around capital investment in the grid over the medium term. And those three areas, if you like, housing, water and the grid, are essential pillars in terms of the future development of the Irish economy and Irish society. And the Apple funding as well will be allocated principally to those areas, although no final decisions have been taken, but political parties no doubt will establish their priorities in respect of that. This government is quite entitled to outline its priorities in respect of the capital, and I've given three key areas there. And we also have surpluses. So the issue actually isn't an absence of capital. The issue is how do we develop a sustainable programme of capital investment that can sustain over a decade and shelter that then from any sort of winds or storms that might come our way in the intervening period. That's the agenda.
Deputy Nash.
Thanks very much, Taoiseach. But I would disagree with you. I think the problem is a lack of ambition and a lack of vision. That's been the consistent pattern here from what I describe as a very conservative coalition. Ireland is a rich country, but you preside over one that continues to feel so poor. There's one key question that I want to put to you, Taoiseach, and that is the status of the residential zoned land tax. The ESRI didn't put a tooth in it today when they said that land comprises about 20% of the final cost of a home. Now, we know that you cannot control material costs, you cannot control labour costs and other costs that go into developing homes, but you have the responsibility to use the tax system responsibly to disincentivise land hoarding. You can make a real difference overnight. So are you going to introduce the residential zoned land tax next week? Are you going to confirm that in the budget? I would appreciate an update from you on that. That is critically important. Or are you going to continue to put the primacy of land ownership before the public good?
Thank you, Deputy.
Well, first of all, it was this government that introduced the RSLT legislation. And also, I think all parties in the House, unless I've mistaken your own position, were of a view that productive farmers, people who are actively working their land, should not be captured by the RZT. I don't know, is that your position or not? But it certainly is the position of the three-party leaders. The mechanisms devised to enable farmers not to be covered have not worked. That's the reality, have not worked. And so therefore, discussions are underway, led by the Minister for Finance. Three-party leaders have been sort of apprised of that proposal, with the objective of which is to exclude people who are active farmers who didn't either seek zoning or who have no intention of zoning, who want to continue on with a bona fide economic activity. I think that's a legitimate point, and there are other issues as well. But the view is to have that issue resolved before budget and the Act brought into and brought the Act in. Yes.
We go now to Deputy Sean Canney on behalf of the regional group.
Okay, Concordia and Taoiseach, I want to follow on the subject of housing, and in particular the issue of affordable housing for first-time buyers in this country. And there are a number of things that can happen that will actually help with the delivery of affordable houses. And I think the first thing is that, and you were talking about wastewater treatment plants, there are many villages and towns in our country and in my constituency that cannot build houses because we do not have a wastewater treatment plant. And back when I became a councillor in 2004, it was on a plan to build one in Corofin, for instance, a place you know well from football. And now, back in 2024, it is not on anybody's agenda. And on board Planola have said that we cannot build any houses in Corofin because it would be premature without a municipal treatment plant, and that was back in 2007. That type of scene is replicated all over the place. And the affordable housing scheme that we now have in place is not working in many of our towns. And for instance, again, I'd pick on Tuam, the largest county town in Galway, and we cannot get an affordable scheme to work with the matrix that's in place because of the contribution towards the development density and all this type of thing. And at the moment in County Galway, the second biggest county in Ireland, we've only one scheme, affordable scheme, which is going to be launched today. So we're falling far behind the curve. And the other issue that's creating the cost and the making housing unviable is the fact that in our zoning policies and in our planning policies, not our planning acts, but in our policy as regards planning, we have this thing called core, the core planning, which basically regulates that we cannot zone as much land as we would like to. We are confined to a certain amount of land called R1 zoning. And when that land then is used up, we will go to R2 land. But the fact of the matter is, Taoiseach, you've said it yourself, some of this land that is zoned is belong to farmers who are functionally farming it, and it will never be available. And secondly, you have other lands where people cannot make it available for legal reasons or for tax reasons or whatever. So we're zoning lands and we're fulfilling local area plans without actually looking to see if the land is available at all. And what that's doing is creating a scarce commodity, which is land that is zoned. And that in turn is adding to the cost of our houses. These are not things that will cost money. These are things that will can be done with a change in policy. And I would ask you, Taoiseach, to consider all of this for the future of our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
I thank the Deputy for raising this issue, and I do accept the basic position that you've put forward. There is an issue with water treatment in many towns and villages across the country, and the country is growing, population is increasing. That's a positive in terms of the progression of Ireland. We are finally, if you like, from a demographic point of view, turning around the decline from the famine era onwards in respect of reaching perhaps the potential of the country. But that means more infrastructure, it means more housing, it means more wastewater treatment plants. And I do think, in the context, as I said earlier, of the allocation of revenue that's coming from the sale of shares of AIB, and some of the potential provision of the Apple funding, that housing and water are key targets for further investment, and further investment that we can future-proof over the next number of years. And that would be my thinking on that. I mean, the situation you've outlined in Corofin, I always thought you had the best of water, given the prowess of your club, which I know too well. But I think it is a problem, and I think we have to engage again with Irish Water in respect of the allocations of funding for the future, with a view to saying that we want, it's not just the bigger cities, that we do want towns and villages looked after as well, in respect of wastewater treatment plants. There's a consequential benefit in terms of water quality and in terms of a whole range of other issues. And the question of zoning of land is important. Some lands are zoned and they simply can't be developed because of the absence of any infrastructure, of any enabling infrastructure, such as wastewater or roads, or some of the land isn't serviced. So I do believe that potentially more zoning should happen to facilitate what will happen in terms of increased housing targets. The targets we currently have are not ceilings. We exceeded last year's targets. We'll exceed this year's target in terms of house completions. But supply is the key issue in terms of house prices and house availability of more houses for people at affordable prices. And we accept that we have to do it on a higher scale. This government has gone from 20,000 houses being built in 2020 to nearly 40,000 being built by the end of this year. That's nearly a doubling of housing output, notwithstanding the interruption of COVID for 1.5 to 2 years. The issue, though, is we need to get from that 40,000 to 60,000 per annum. And we can only do that with enabling infrastructure. And water is a key part of that enabling infrastructure.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And I take on board what you said.
Canney.
Whilst I mentioned Corofin, we have 30 towns and villages in County Galway who are earmarked for wastewater. We have 30 towns and villages which are earmarked. And at the same time, we're creating restrictions on rural housing. So we're telling people they cannot live in the rural areas. We're telling them to move into the towns and villages. Houses cannot be built there, and the urgency is not there. Craughwell in County Galway was allocated funding for a wastewater treatment plant last year. And it'll probably be another 5 to 6 years before we see that delivered. That is the reality. So the processes we're using are completely out of sync with the emergency that housing is. And I think we need to take this for what it is. It is an economic, social problem at the moment where we cannot build houses where they are needed. And secondly, when you see that 50,000 units that got planning permission last year have not commenced yet, there is something going wrong. And the private housing market is completely dysfunctional. So we need to reduce the cost, and we can do that without costing money by looking outside the box and saying, let's get more land zoned. Let's tweak the affordable housing scheme, which is a fine scheme if it could work in a lot more areas. Thank you.
Like the affordable housing schemes, they're making progress. I mean, 21 local authorities are now actively planning, developing and delivering sustainable affordable purchase schemes with the support of the Affordable Housing Fund. And, you know, across the board, a concept really that has only begun in the last number of years has really gained traction now and momentum, and will continue to do so. I mean, don't forget that this year, 50,000 new homes have commenced in the past 12 months. That's the highest in a long time. We had close to 33,000 housing completions last year. So we have to keep driving on. But I think there is a specific issue around towns and villages across the country, in addition to the major work that Irish Water is doing. And I think there has to be an engagement with Irish Water and local authorities to make sure that significant more capital that will be allocated, that a portion of that is provided for the towns and villages across the country.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. We go now to Deputy Richard Donoghue on behalf of the Rural Independent Group.
Thank you, Con Corla. Taoiseach, yesterday I attended in the AV room, the Scoliosis Advocates Network and Spinal Bifida Pediatric Advanced Group. It was probably one of the most packed AV rooms that I have been here in the 5 years I was here. And when their stories were told, there wasn't one dry eye in the room. Parents with their children in wheelchairs. There was people there in crutches with their spines twisted. And they were given a commitment by the Taoiseach 2 years ago. Again, when he was Minister for Health. And told him that he would meet him and told him there would be 9.1 million made available for them. That 9.1 million has gone in to the overspending somewhere within the HSE and has never been seen since. We now have some of these children have to leave this country to get operations, to give them a quality of life. There was one person there yesterday who was inoperable and can't leave this country for any operation. One of them said to me, Richard, what is the definition of madness? They said, sorry, I must actually get it right. It's when the same thing is done over and over again and you're expecting a different result. That seems to come to play when the government of this country go to the country and every time people come back, they vote for the same people all the time. They told them the same things all the time, but make no change. Where is the accountability in Cabinet when somebody promises somebody 9.1 million for a quality of life and doesn't deliver? Where is the accountability from the Taoiseach? And there's emails to prove it that they've asked him for the last 18 months to meet them, and he's refused. And he's put them into different, oh, this committee will meet you, this committee will meet you. But he hasn't met them themselves. They have the emails to prove it, while there's children suffering. For procedures to be put in place for a quality of life. Why does this Cabinet stand by and allow this happen when you spend 336,000 in a bike shed, 1.4 million on a security shed, 1.2 million on a cabin out the front there for RT to put in their bits and pieces, and you can't give 9.1 million to help a quality of life of children that are suffering?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for raising this issue, which is causing immense anxiety and stress and trauma to many families, and particularly to the children who require surgery and treatment in a timely manner. And I would say to you, Deputy, that this is being prioritised within government, has been prioritised. Funding isn't an issue from the government's perspective. Additional staff has been recruited. There have been issues, as you know, in respect to some aspects of that over the last 2 years. There has been a significant increase in the number of paediatric spinal procedures carried out in 2022 and 2023. I'm not going to go through all the figures because, as far as I'm concerned, it's not enough until every child is enabled to have an operation when it's optimally prescripted, if you like, by the clinicians that this is the time the child needs the operation and the child should get the operation. That's why I've been a strong supporter of outsourcing. If capacity doesn't exist within the national system, and it has been increased, that has to be said, it has been increased, funding has been provided, and there's more operations and procedures being done, but there's still, in my view, the waiting times are too long for children. And where possible, in my view, we should facilitate children getting their surgery done in a timely manner. And there is now, the HSE is engaging with Children's Health Ireland, who is responsible for this, the National Orthopaedic Hospital in Capita, Blackrock Clinic, and the National Treatment Purchase Fund, to coordinate national outsourcing opportunities for both spinal and non-spinal orthopaedic work to ensure maximum capacity for complex spinal surgeries in CHI. And they're looking, an arrangement with Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital in New York has been finalised. Consultants from New York have travelled to Ireland to see patients at a clinic in Dublin. Following a clinic held in Dublin with surgeons from Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, a cohort of patients have been offered treatment abroad, and this is in progress. And an arrangement has also been finalised with Portland Hospital, United Kingdom. And families will be supported in accessing these pathways if it is the right option for their children. And that will include travel, flights, accommodation, transport, and a subsistence rate for expenses. Ideally, we would want all children to be done in the country. But in my view, timely intervention is the key for the child. That is my personal view. When I was a Minister for Health in 2002, 2003, we sent 100 children to Johns Hopkins in the United States because we were redoing or building new theatres in Crumlin. And our consultants here led that, and it worked effectively at the time. In my view, what should guide this is the needs of the child and timely interventions. And I've discussed this with the Minister for Health, and between increasing national capacity and just eliminating the waiting times by those that we can get good arrangements in Great Ormond Street and elsewhere, we should pursue that.
Donoghue.
Thank you, Tánaiste. You mentioned CHI with the HSC and advocates. This is the same people that are actually heading this since 2015, except they're just under a new name. Nothing has changed.
Sorry?
The same people from that system are under a new name, new positions put up. It's the same people. The one thing that you left out in your contribution was, and you said anxiety for the people, you left out the main thing here. The pain children are going through unnecessarily. And also, you mentioned, right, that some of these children can't leave the country for these operations. And they have to be looked at on a 12-monthly basis for their growth and everything else as they grow older. And if the operations aren't done within that timely period, you are creating unneeded pain for these children. So if it's not funding, it's not clinical, why isn't it happening? And why are these people here again yesterday and waiting for 2 years for the Taoiseach to get back to them, and their children in pain? In pain, Tánaiste. That's the bottom line. We can say what we like here, but they wouldn't be here if what you were saying was being done. And they're at their wits' end, watching their children and loved ones in pain every day, which not only is putting those children in pain, but they're watching all their family and their unit around them, seeing them in pain. That's where the problem lies.
Thank you.
Could I just say that it's about capacity, and like in 2019, there was about 380 procedures being done on an annual basis in 2019. Last year, there was about 464. There was a higher amount actually in 2022. There was 509 spinal procedures. The hiring of more healthcare professionals has happened in Crumlin and Temple Street Children's Hospitals and Kappa. A fifth theatre in Temple Street was opened in October of last year. An additional magnetic MRI scanner was installed in October 2023. 24 beds, which are now all operational, provided, and further activity in paediatric theatre lists at Kappa. More cases have come on, or more children have come on the list and so on. As far as I'm concerned, we have to do whatever it takes to get the operations done.
So how many of those children were operated on twice?
Now, what I would say to you,
from the rods breaking in their backs.
I would say as well is that
double figures are given.
Please, Deputy.
If children who can be treated overseas, and it's not ideal, I understand that, although there has been a long-standing relationship between our children's hospitals and hospitals like Great Ormond Street and hospitals in the United States. So the idea of collaboration between them is nothing new.
Honestly, the figures you're given are inaccurate.
A whole range of things.
Right,
and I think
figures you're given are inaccurate because some of those operations have been done twice for children that the rods broke in their backs, and they were operated on twice within 2 years. And they're also in those stats.
Will you let the Tánaiste answer?
As far as I'm concerned, I want every child looked after, but we have to do it in the most effective way we can. I think the most effective way we can do it now is a combination of building up national capacity and also for children who are waiting too long, have those children looked
way
after
over
in the
time.
number of hospitals that I identified there earlier.
Thank you. That concludes leaders' questions. As I say, we're way over time.